several years. And then tried that for the next several years and ended up then moving it to 2 weekends. And we've tried a couple different things. We've done Thursday, Friday, Saturday of 2 weekends. We've done Friday, Saturday of 2 weekends. And there's some pros and cons for it. It is slightly different than a lot of other events because it does have a lot more overhead. We have to buy all the beer and whatnot for it as well too. So adding additional performance nights comes with a lot more. But the demand for it has always been really quite high. And so we've tried to open up at least like to a open dress rehearsal, which doesn't have the craft beer selection portion of it, but we do happen to be performing in a fully stocked bar that is pretty awesome. My favorite in Elko, the Duncan Willow Creek, not just for the people, but also for the services that they provide. They are good at what they do. And so they can still get to see the performance, if anything else, while they enjoy a drink and whatnot. And so we did not do it during the pandemic, of course. And so that has been the only year that we've skipped so far. But I believe we are on our, I think this is the eighth or ninth. My math skills aren't so good, so I imagine that somebody should probably be able to.
Yeah, maybe eighth. If you subtract the 1 year you were unable to do it.
Yeah.
So Frank approached you early on. So did you have some previous experience in the performing arts? What were the reasons why he sort of wanted you to bring, why did he want to bring you in the early stages?
I've been working with Frank in community theater generally for the last 22 years, 23 years or so. And so me and Frank had originally met during Love, Sex, and the IRS. Was the first show that I had worked with him in Silver Stage Players. And I want to say that was 2002 or 2003 for it. But I did some GBC productions prior to that, right out of high school in 2000. And that's where he had first seen me on stage and then recruited me into his own projects. And so we've been working through those years, but did Bard in the Yard as well, which was a little more similar because it is a kind of project and annual thing at the time that he was trying to do, which was a lot of fun as well. And so we've become quite good friends, and I think that's why he probably pulled me in.
Okay. So go back to a point you made earlier that initially there was some skepticism about whether or not an event like this would work in Elko. Just talk a little bit more about that. I mean, what are some of the reasons why it is so popular and successful, and maybe why? Can you account for some of the surprise that people might feel that it is such a hit?
Yeah, well, I think people originally, especially, and on the first one when we had the Resistance, I think people were under the impression that we were going to go out there with a book and read the story with a little flair on the end, right? To do it and then feed them some beer. I don't think that people were prepared or ready for the full dramatic interpretations of what those were. And so I think that helped us. But I really think the magic of the event is that it is theater right there. Like, because all of the actors are walking within the space. In fact, just because of the limitations of how the space is, depending on where you sit is going to determine kind of the show that you get, because not everything is just perfectly there and in front of you like a normal theatrical performance would be. And so you actually really get to see every little detail and facial twitch and whatnot, and really get to be part of that energy that's going on stage, which is really cool. And so I think that really sells it. I think given Elko, that the alcohol component really sells it. And we have, which I would like, and maybe this is awful, but I would actually like to start separating some of our events off from having an alcohol component, just because I think that it does create a different atmosphere for it. The educational aspects of what we do with Silver Stage Players is important to me as well. And sometimes those don't translate as well or don't look as well when you're like, yes, and we're also going to give you beer, right? Not that those are mutually exclusive by any means, sure. But is there. But I think it's the fact that it's just right there for people.
Yeah, real sense of sort of immediacy. And yeah, I mean, can you talk a little bit more about the interpretive work that you guys do? So, like, I mean, sort of, can you describe that process maybe a little bit? Like, how do you take these texts, which are often, you know, and they're old fashioned. The language is certainly challenging for many. How do you turn them into a more easily digestible product for the audience?
Yeah, well, and that is a process that we are learning and refining as we go as well too. So how that starts is usually around March or April. We'll start with a cutting crew, and we'll start looking over Poe's catalog, but also similar authors in there, any of the Gothic writers or so, or in a similar vein. And then anything that strikes our fancy, we'll bring to the cutting room and say, hey, we would like to do this. But then you also kind of have to have, and especially as long as we've been doing it now, you have to have an angle for any of those as well. And so we've done the Raven. This will be our fourth time doing the Raven this year, and we want that to be different each time. And so we've come up with a different way to interpret that poem each time for it. We've done it as someone who's disabled and in a wheelchair, and thinking back about before the accident or their youth, we've had the more classic interpretations of it, and I'm excited for what we're doing now. I'm not going to say what it is, but we are mixing a few other Gothic stories together for the Raven this time. But anyway, so we'll also come up with an angle once we've kind of talked about it and seen which ones that we want to do. Then we divvy those up, and then people start the cutting process. And so luckily, most of those stories come from the first person narrator, and so that makes it a little easier to start bridging those things into actual text. But we do cut it up quite a bit, and we try to make it convert it over as best as possible to a theatrical style. And so sometimes we do have to change the language a little bit. We try to keep some of that in there, or a good chunk of it, I should say, just so that way it is still Poe's work, but we will change things so that way it sounds more like dialogue rather than just long passages of exposition for it as well. And so I think that we try to stay as honest and pure to the story itself, even if some of that language changes a little bit, where we introduce different aspects, such like the Black Cat this year. We actually have the Black Cat is a character, has a whole bunch of lines, all been crafted, right? So we have original works that go in there. Dr. Josh Webster has written two shows for us throughout the years as well, plus our intro each year.
Okay, yeah. So you sent me the list of the texts that you guys are working with this year. So yeah, you mentioned the Raven, a couple of short stories as well by Poe, but also a work by Lovecraft, and maybe even a couple of Robert Browning poems. So I was just I've been asking everybody sort of about their sort of personal feelings or connections with these authors and texts. I mean, what are your own feelings about Poe? Do you have any personal connections, or like why these texts? If you could maybe shed some light on that.
Well, I think that and this kind of tags into a little bit as to why I think people enjoy the event as well, is because we don't spend a lot of time in theater on the macabre and the scary and the spooky, right? You just don't see as much of that. People really like their fun musicals and things, or it goes dramatic and then we're crying because somebody's got 6 months to live. But we don't get into a lot of things that are just scary and dealing with those darker emotions. And so I think that there is still a place in the psyche for that. And Edgar Allan Poe is really is the man in American literature for that. Whether people have actually read the stories or not, they know of them. There's the Poe effect that you've talked about in your own lectures and whatnot, that people are familiar with it, and it does touch into that collective cultural background that's there. And so I think being able to bring these stories forward and to be able to reinvent them over and over, I think that there's something real magical about storytelling, that you want to hear the same story, that there's a comfort there, which is why we tell the same scary story over the campfire, even though we know the ending. It's about the journey of getting through it. And we find the same thing with Poe, is that Poe, and I'll go on record for this, but Poe has, when it's good, it's amazing. And there's some really good stuff that Poe has done. when it gets really philosophical and a little more opium dream over here, it is a little rougher, and or at least, if I'm being kind, is not as appropriate for the sort of work that we are trying to bring forward
Right.
into this
Right.
project. I'm sure there's someone who loves it. So we end up really with a catalog of about 6 or 7 really good Poe stories, and they're the ones everybody knows. Black Cat, Telltale
Yeah.
Heart, that kind of stuff. The Raven.
They really lend themselves to the drama, to dramatic presentation.
Yeah, and so but to be able to tell those in a different way is really quite cool. For some of the other ones, and I really enjoy being able to dip into the other authors. I'm a huge fan of Lovecraft and cosmic horror in general. For it, there's a lot of good stuff. As this is getting recorded, there's a lot of great stuff where people are taking the ideas of cosmic horror and Lovecraft's work and actually inverting the racism or finding different ways of using those ideas that are really quite awesome. And so I encourage people to continue digging into there and don't just stop at the awful things that Lovecraft also put into his works. But I do enjoy cosmic horror quite a bit, and so being able to bring him into it is really fun. And I've been able to be in the performance side of that of most of them. We're doing Pigman's model this year, and it hurts. It hurts a little to be on the director side and not being able to jump in there. But we've even talked about a spin-off doing Lovecraft and Long Island's, which no one gets out of, evidently on that one, but would be still fun to do.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about, I mean, so you've been on both sides, you've performed, you've directed, like, can you talk about some of the differences between, or are you still doing both? Have you really transitioned from one to the other, or are you still kind of wearing both hats?
For Poe and Pints, I've definitely transitioned over to the directorial side. That doesn't mean that I may not find my way over onto that back to performing at some point in time, but I would like to be able to wear that hat. And there's just a lot of amazing talent here, and so I don't think that it's necessary that I am in that spot when we have people like Hillary and Sarah and Dusty and them that can be jumping in, and we can showcase the amazing things that they can bring to the work as well. So I would like to continue performing in other things, and have worked with that. We did a summer series and whatnot, and we've got some other things going on with Silver Stage Players. But for Poe and Pints, at least, I will probably stay on the directorial side for quite some time.
So I've often thought about this more in the context of movies, but you've heard the argument that former actors can sometimes be very good directors because they understand sort of the acting process, and it might enable them to work better with actors. Do you find that to be true? Like, does it help to have that experience when you're working with actors? Does it give you sort of a shared vocabulary?
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely think so. And I think that you have to think of that. I mean, every director is going to be coming in with their own kind of vision, and there's something about being able to look down and say, yeah, this is working or that's not working. But ultimately, those choices are going to be up to your actors. And I think a lot of times, if you don't have that experience or know what it's like to be on that side of it, you can try to steamroll that and be like, no, this is what's in my head. Why are you not the robots marching out and doing what I want that to be? Because you have to give them agency, and you're going to get better stuff if you give them agency. And I think that you understand that and what that process can be. Or when they say, I really need to have the blocking on this before I can memorize it. That as a director, you may not immediately get, but as an actor, you're like, no, I have my own quirks, right? I have my own process, and that's just how things get stored in my brain. And so I think that helps to know what that's like on both sides.
Yeah. So let's go back in time a bit. This would have been a good first question, but how did you really first get interested in the performing arts?
In high school, I did forensics, which was a lot of fun. And then in 2000, when I started with GBC, they were doing The Tempest. And so just thought, well, yeah, sure, we'll go ahead and try that out and see what it's like. And it is a different world than forensics, absolutely. But I just caught that bug and kept going with it. not only are you going to not find a better group of people than theater kids, generally speaking, they are pretty cool. I enjoy them. But we just had a really great group of people at the time, many of them that I'm still friends with or that are currently acting in shows now, right?
Mhm.
Erica Patrick is working with us, and she was one of the first people that I knew um, in GBC in those early days for theater. And so to me, it is the social part of it, and especially as we do community theater, if you, there isn't some sort of social aspect to the reason why you're in that, I don't know why you're there,
Right.
because that's half the point, is that everybody gets to be able to go out on stage and play and see what that's like. But and not only that, but theater just gives you such a wonderful way of looking at the world, getting to experience a variety of things, understanding different things about yourself, what makes you angry, what makes you sad, what makes you happy, or how you could be in that or this person's shoes for a time. Whether that's escapism and I just don't want to be me for a while, or if that is something just much more about being able to understand why someone may do something horrific or do something really nice or whatnot.
Mhm.
Just like literature, it
Right.
expands your viewpoint, and it touches everything because you have to represent everything in life.
Right. Yeah. It just kind of expands your experience. Yeah. Well, one thing I was struck by yesterday when I was talking to some of the cast members is the fact that a couple of them really haven't been with you guys for long. So Dusty and I think Hillary mentioned that they've really only been doing Poe and Pints for maybe a couple of years. I mean, fairly recent. So I was wondering, how do you guys expand the circle? I mean, do you like, how do you find sort of fresh talent? How do you get new people uh, into these productions?
Well, theater's like a cult. No, that's not true. We do open auditions, which gets there, and it is, you kind of know your pool of actors that you're gonna get generally. But then every once in a while, someone like Hillary walks in that has just come into town,
Mhm.
knows some other theater kids around, and wants to get involved, and just blows you away. I mean, Hillary is a phenomenal actor, and we're very lucky to have her. Dusty being able to come in, and I'm trying to think of how Dusty joined us originally, of where he was. Um, but again, on the last run, he was trying a French accent. I'm like, can you dial that back by 50%? And he was able to. That's not something I could do, right? You are either getting fully how my brain wants to process that or not, and so that's really quite neat too for it. But it is a lot just by word of mouth, people who are interested in it. But then a lot of times after shows, you're talking to people and they want to try tech, or they want to try, getting up there. That's why I like anytime that we can do things that have like improv,
Mhm.
um, it, give people the opportunity to get that taste, see if they like it or not. And then, if it is, then we have full length shows if you'd like to play with it more, right?
Yeah.
Um, but it's definitely a social circle as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I can get you out of here on this question. It's been sort of the final question for everyone. So, like, obviously, the show has entertainment value, also educational value. But if you had to sort of summarize, I mean, what are you hoping audience members take away, like overall? Like, what is sort of what's the most important takeaway for you since you've been involved in it for so long and you're involved in the conceptual stage? Like really, what do you want people to gain from this?
Ooh, and it actually happened last year, and I was so wildly excited for it. I've been always a firm believer that the only competition in theater is a bad show, because if you're doing a good show, then people are going to want more of it. It doesn't matter what it is, right? But if you give them a bad show, then they're going to be like, "Yeah, we tried that, not really my thing," and then they never go to another show after that. And last year it was the final night, and we had two people who had never been to a show before, had just kind of come to this one. And as we get to walk out during the flights, you get to meet people and whatnot as we're serving out the beer. And they were so ecstatic about it, and they just really were enjoying themselves that night. And the lady said, well, and I just got tickets for Evil Dead the musical, which is happening later on in October. It's also happening later on in this October as well. Ghostlight Productions is doing it. I got to see it last year. It's a great show. Please go check it out. But she goes, I just bought tickets for that because I need to go see another show. Like, I didn't realize that this stuff was happening in Elko. And I was like, yes, then that means that, you know, we've fulfilled our promise to the theatrical community here, that we didn't do a bad show and that people wanted more of it. And so that they would immediately go buy tickets in the intermission of this show to go see more of it because they wanted it. If I could get that out of it, then I would be a very, very happy man.
That's great. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop it there.